Every state in the U.S. brings something different to the table, but Florida, it's truly in a league of its own. Just look at it. A big sun-soaked peninsula jutting out into the Atlantic and the Gulf, with its famously flat land, a subtropical to tropical climate, and ground made mostly of porous limestone that shapes everything from its springs to its sinkholes. It's easy to see why so many big cities sprang up there along the coast. Think about Miami, Tampa, Orlando, and Jacksonville, all thriving in the sunshine and drawing people from around the country and the world. But here's a detail people often overlook. Not all of Florida is bustling with crowds. Up in northern Florida, only about 18% of the state's population actually lives there. That's just 3.9 million people, spread out across a vast area. So, why does the North feel so empty and quiet compared to the packed urban centers farther south? You'll often hear Floridians joke, the farther south you go, the more north you get. At first, that sounds confusing, but there's some real truth to it. As you travel down the peninsula, the state gets busier, denser, and more cosmopolitan, reflecting a mix of cultures and influences. In contrast, the northern panhandle, stretching west toward Alabama, feels a lot like the deep south, slower-paced, quieter, more rural, and with fewer high-rises or massive developments. It's a place where you'll find pine forests, small towns, and a different accent. But head south, and suddenly you're surrounded by huge, diverse cities, places that in some ways feel like New York or Philadelphia, but with palm trees, pastel colors, and year-round warmth. The culture, food, and even the pace of life can change dramatically as you drive south through the state. How did Florida end up with this unusual split between north and south? Let's dig into the history and geography to find out. Speaking of weather and geography, it makes you wonder which state really has the best setup for living. If you're curious to see how Florida compares to the rest, check out my Patreon where I break down the details, from climate to terrain and more. But let's get back to Florida's origins. The state actually has a much longer history in America than many people realize. European explorers first from Spain showed up here long before they set foot in most other parts of what would become the United States. And long before Europeans arrived, this land was home to a wide range of indigenous tribes like the Timucua, Apalachee, Calusa, Tequesta, and several others, each with their own societies, traditions, and connections to the landscape. These communities thrived for thousands of years, shaping the land and culture of Florida. Sadly, most of them disappeared after the arrival of Europeans in the 1500s, due to disease, conflict, and colonization. The year 1513 marked a turning point when Juan Ponce de Leon landed on Florida's shores, setting off centuries of dramatic transformation, with waves of new people, ideas, and changes that would make Florida the unique state it is today. Juan Ponce de Leon showed up on Florida's east coast in the early 1500s, chasing stories of the Fountain of Youth, instead of finding those legendary waters. He ended up giving the place its name, La Florida, after Spain's Easter festival, Pascua, Florida, which means Feast of Flowers. De Leon didn't stumble across any magical springs granting eternal youth, but he did plant the Spanish flag and claim a vast stretch of land for Spain, laying the groundwork for centuries of European influence in the region. Not long after, Spain established St. Augustine in 1565. This settlement holds the distinction of being the oldest European city in the continental United States that has been continuously inhabited ever since its founding. However, Spain's hold on Florida was always precarious. Indigenous tribes, including the Timucua, Apalachee, and later the Seminoles, resisted Spanish intrusion and tried to defend their homelands. At the same time, France and Britain eyed Florida's strategic coastline and resources, hoping to carve out their own territories. Even the environment seemed hostile. Florida's powerful hurricanes battered ships, toppled settlements, and devastated crops from the very beginning, adding yet another layer of challenge to colonial ambitions. The difficulty of settling Florida became painfully clear in 1559 when a hurricane slammed into a Spanish fleet and their fledgling colony at Pensacola. The storm destroyed their ships and supplies, leaving the settlers stranded and forcing them to abandon the settlement and return to Mexico. But the Spanish were persistent. They gradually adapted to Florida's unpredictable climate, learning to construct sturdier homes with coquina and raise crops that could withstand the weather, while also forging uneasy relationships with local tribes. Throughout the 1600s and 1700s, Florida became a chessboard for European rivalry. The British, wary of Spanish power creeping too close to their wealthy colonies in Virginia and the Carolinas, set up Georgia as a protective buffer. Skirmishes, shifting alliances, and occasional outright wars marked the centuries. With Spain and Britain battling for control, in 1763, after the 7 Years' War, Britain seized Florida as part of a treaty deal. But British rule was short-lived as 20 years later, in 1783, the territory reverted to Spain after the American Revolution, demonstrating how fluid and contested Florida's ownership was during this era. Everything changed in the early 1800s. Spain, exhausted by the expense and trouble of holding Florida, agreed to transfer the territory to the United States through the Adams-Onis Treaty in 1821. This marked a turning point, as American settlers poured in, introducing new farming methods and establishing large plantations. But these changes weren't without conflict. The Seminole people, who had migrated into Florida during the 1700s, found their land increasingly encroached upon by settlers and the U.S. government. Tensions erupted into violence, leading to the protracted and bloody Seminole Wars, which lasted from 1817 to 1858 and became some of the longest and most expensive conflicts between Native Americans and the United States. Florida finally joined the Union as the 27th state on March 3, 1845. Statehood brought fresh opportunities for growth. Agriculture flourished, especially with cotton and citrus crops taking root on the landscape. Yet even as it grew, Florida retained a character all its own. The state's unique mix of cultures, dramatic weather, strategic importance, and a history of resistance and resilience has always set it apart from the rest of the country. From its earliest days of contested ownership and wild ambitions to its distinctive modern identity, there's just no other place in America quite like Florida. Florida's story stretches all the way back to its roots as one of Spain's oldest colonies, and you can really feel that history woven into the character of the state. It's not just a random patch of land, but a place with deep, colorful layers that set it apart from anywhere else in the U.S. but beyond its historic past. What truly makes Florida stand out is its wild and fascinating geography, which is like nowhere else on the map. Before we dive deeper into that, if you're enjoying this video, don't forget to hit subscribe. There's plenty more fascinating geography and cool facts coming your way. Among all 50 states, Florida easily grabs attention for having the most instantly recognizable shape. That long, slender peninsula slices dramatically between the turquoise waters of the Gulf of Mexico and the deep blue Atlantic Ocean, with the Straits of Florida curving around its southernmost tip. This unique stretch of land isn't just eye-catching on a map, it influences nearly everything about Florida, from its weather patterns and climate zones to the resources and wildlife that thrive there. Florida runs roughly 500 miles from its northern border all the way down to its southernmost keys, and at its widest, it spans about 460 miles across. Despite its impressive length and width though, the state is surprisingly flat and low-lying. Its highest natural point, Britton Hill, is tucked away in the Panhandle and reaches only 345 feet above sea level, barely a blip compared to the towering peaks in other states. But what Florida lacks in elevation, it makes up for with coastline, stretching about 1,350 miles. Its shoreline is the longest in the continental United States. Only Alaska, with its sprawling jagged coast, has more miles of coastline if you include the whole nation. On the eastern side, the Atlantic coastal plain dominates the landscape. Imagine mile after mile of sandy beaches, a string of barrier islands, and dunes that shift and reshape themselves with every tide and storm. The Atlantic's restless waves and powerful tides are constantly sculpting this edge of Florida. In between these sandy stretches lie lagoons and estuaries, sheltered bodies of water that teem with marine life, birds, and native plants. This ever-shifting border between land and ocean creates a hotspot for biodiversity, nurturing fisheries and supporting ecosystems that are crucial both for wildlife and for the local economy. Cross over to the west, and you find yourself on the Gulf coastal plain. Here, the land gently slopes out into the warm, shallow waters of the Gulf of Mexico. The coastline is dotted with broad marshes, sprawling wetlands, and dense mangrove forests, especially at river mouths, where freshwater mingles with saltwater. These tangled, vibrant ecosystems do more than just look beautiful. They form a living shield that protects the shore from erosion, provides essential nurseries for young fish and crustaceans, and serves as habitat for countless species, from wading birds to alligators. Venture further south, and you arrive in the heart of the Florida Peninsula. The land flattens even more, with only a few low rolling hills breaking the horizon. Here lies the legendary Everglades, one of the planet's most renowned and unique wetlands. The Everglades isn't just a swamp, it's actually an immense, slow-moving river of grass, wide and shallow, that flows south from Lake Okeechobee all the way to Florida Bay and the Gulf. This vast wetland isn't just iconic, it's absolutely vital, working as a natural filter to cleanse the water, controlling floods by absorbing excess rainfall, and providing sanctuary for an astounding range of wildlife. From endangered American crocodiles and manatees to the extremely rare Florida panther, the Everglades also play a crucial cultural and economic role, supporting tourism, recreation, and the traditions of Native American tribes who have called these wetlands home for centuries. When it comes to the weather, Florida is divided between regions with humid subtropical climates in the north and central parts, and full-on tropical weather in the far south. Its position, sandwiched between the Atlantic and Gulf, helps keep winter temperatures mild and frost rare. But in the summer, that same geography means the state becomes a hot, steamy greenhouse, with high humidity and frequent dramatic thunderstorms that roll in almost daily. The abundance of warm water on both sides also makes Florida a magnet for hurricanes. Both the Atlantic and Gulf regularly spawn powerful tropical storms, and Florida's long, flat, and exposed coastline leaves it especially vulnerable to storm surges, flooding, and damaging winds. Sometimes, the state gets hit by multiple hurricanes in a single season, which can have huge impacts on communities, infrastructure, and the environment. Beneath the surface, Florida's geology is just as fascinating as its coastal scenery. Much of the state rests on a bedrock of porous limestone, which over thousands of years has been slowly dissolved by rainwater and groundwater. This process has created a landscape riddled with sinkholes, freshwater springs, and hidden underground rivers, an underground labyrinth that's constantly evolving. This limestone bedrock is also home to the Floridan Aquifer, one of the most productive aquifers in the world. It supplies drinking water to millions of people across Florida and neighboring states. And its clean, abundant water keeps Florida's farms lush and green even during dry spells. The interaction between the state's unique surface features and its hidden underground world is one of the reasons Florida's environments is so rich, complex, and sometimes unpredictable. All these elements, the deep history, the unusual shape, the endless coastlines, the critical wetlands, the dynamic weather, and the mysterious underground combine to make Florida a place that's not just beautiful, but endlessly interesting. It's a state shaped by water, defined by its extremes, and alive with a diversity found nowhere else in the country. Florida's geography is honestly pretty wild. It's had a big say in where people end up living. If you check out a map, you'll notice most people settle in the southern half. Up north, especially in the Panhandle, things are much quieter. There are lots of reasons for this, a mix of nature, economics, and history all combined. The Panhandle is full of swamps, mangroves, and wetlands. It's not the same as the wide, sandy beaches that draw crowds down south. Sure, those marshes do wonders for the environment, but they're not exactly top vacation spots. People don't rush there for sunbathing or swimming, so the population stays lower in the north. Another thing that holds the Panhandle back, it doesn't have the natural harbors or big, navigable rivers that other parts of Florida have. Cities like Miami and Tampa have huge ports that keep trade and travel busy. The Panhandle missed out on that, so businesses and settlers picked other places. Plus, with New Orleans and its major port just across the way at the mouth of the Mississippi, there wasn't much reason to create a big port along Florida's upper Gulf Coast. Southern Florida, though, got lucky with its geography. Natural harbors like Tampa Bay and Charlotte Harbor, along with the Miami River leading to the port of Miami, gave it a real advantage. These waterways helped trade and tourism take off, bringing in jobs and making the region grow quickly. Because of all this, major cities popped up: Miami, Fort Lauderdale, West Palm Beach, Tampa, St. Petersburg, Cape Coral. People from all over the country and even the world keep moving in. Even Orlando, which isn't on the coast, owes its start to the land. It was covered in citrus groves at first, but then the real estate boom in the 1920s brought in thousands more. Later, Disney and the space industry showed up, and the city just kept growing. Northern Florida isn't empty, though. Jacksonville is a good example. It's the biggest city up there, with a strong port, diverse industries, and a lively culture. Still, even Jacksonville's metro population is much smaller than Miami, Tampa, or Orlando. The South just keeps pulling ahead, and it all goes back to geography setting the scene. Jacksonville ranks 4th in terms of metro area population, which really highlights how more and more people keep moving to southern Florida. The climate has a lot to do with this. Up north, Florida gets cooler winters and the weather is more unpredictable. Down south, though, it stays warm and tropical year-round. That endless sunshine attracts retirees and anyone chasing a lifestyle where every day feels like summer. So the southern part of the state keeps growing faster than the north. Southern Florida also feels a lot like the Caribbean, Central America, or South America, so it's no surprise that so many migrants from those regions choose to settle there. That's actually why Miami is sometimes called the capital of Latin America. These days, Miami's metro area leads the state with about 6.1 million people, making it the 8th largest in the entire country. After that, you have Tampa with 3.2 million, Orlando with 2.7 million, and then Jacksonville with 1.6 million. If you look at the Panhandle, Pensacola is the largest metro area with about 510,000 people, and Tallahassee, the state capital, has 309,000. But talking about the Panhandle brings up an interesting question. Why does Florida even have the Panhandle? Why isn't it part of Alabama? Florida's claim to the Panhandle dates back to the early 1800s. The borders we know today are the result of colonial-era land claims, old treaties, and decisions made when states joined the Union. Originally, the Panhandle was part of the Spanish colony called West Florida. Spain controlled it from the late 1700s into the early 1800s, but the region's borders kept shifting due to conflicts and treaties with other European powers. In 1810, settlers in West Florida got tired of Spanish rule, declared independence, and asked the U.S. to take over. That's when the U.S. stepped in. The Adams-Onis Treaty of 1819 between Spain and the U.S. made it official. Spain handed over all of Florida, including the Panhandle. That treaty set Florida's borders, placing the Panhandle firmly inside the state. When Florida became a U.S. territory in 1821 and then a state in 1845, the Panhandle stayed part of it, just like the treaty said. Alabama, which became a state in 1819, never really made a move to claim the Panhandle. The borders were set and everyone went along with them. Honestly, at the time, nobody thought the Panhandle was all that valuable. It didn't have much economic or strategic importance, so there wasn't much competition for it. In the end, the Panhandle just became part of Florida thanks to a treaty with Spain, and Alabama didn't put up much of a fight. So, to sum it up, migration and the draw of sun and sand shifted Florida's population toward the south, leaving the north and the Panhandle less developed. The Panhandle itself never became a huge destination for new residents, partly because it doesn't have as many endless sandy beaches as other parts of the state. Florida really is a beautiful place. If you want to bring some of that beauty into your own home, check out some of the great maps in my store. They'd look awesome on your wall. Thanks for joining me for this little journey through Florida. If you enjoyed this, hit subscribe, check out my other videos or my podcast, and I'll see you next time.